Welcome to Forensic Friday, on an actual Friday this time, where I tell you one true crime case that was solved using forensic science, all while doing, and that's right, my makeup. Today's video will be featuring the new Hella palette from Odin's Eye Cosmetics in collaboration with Angelica Niched. I think that's how you say her name here on YouTube. I probably just embarrassed myself. But anyway, I'm so excited. I can't wait to show you guys the inside of this palette. All the other items I'm using in this video will be linked in the description below. Please read the disclaimer. I am not a professional makeup artist, nor am I a professional forensic pathologist. I'm just the average girl at home like you, planning my makeup. Sometimes I do my nails while I talk about a true crime case. So if that's something you're into, then you are more than welcome to hit that subscribe button. Also, a quick reminder, the comment section is a privilege. Don't fuck it up. Now let's get into today's case. This story takes place in Roebuck, South Carolina in the year 1995, where 27-year-old Dana Satterfield lived with her two children. Now Dana, she had been separated from her husband for some time, but they were quite amicable about the separation. They were in the process of getting a divorce. Dana was a beautiful blonde bombshell. She was really pretty. She was very much into doing hair. She was a hairstylist. She had gotten into hair pretty early on in her years. Hair was Dana's passion, and so she decided to open her own hair salon. Now, what Dana did was she took a mobile home and she transformed the mobile home into a hair salon and opened her own business. You go, girl, you go. This is the type of women that I love. Like, yes, girl, go. Dana would do some of the most fashionable haircuts. I'm sorry guys, like my nose is so stuffy that just me putting things on my face, I feel like I can't breathe, like I'm being suffocated. I apologize. Okay, but it's life. So Dana was one of the best in her neighborhood, like I said, in her area. It was, I wouldn't say it was a small town, but everybody in her town knew her, like they all knew each other kind of. And it actually became quite successful. She had a decent amount of clients she was able to do. So like she was living her dream basically. Now, from my understanding, Dana's children didn't always live with her. They actually stayed with their father a lot, and he lived, he lived a few miles away from Dana, not quite in the city that Dana lived, but a few miles out. And it was said that Dana would oftentimes come back to, you know, spend time with the children and with her husband. And like I said, they really ended their relationship on good terms. There wasn't any turmoil or anything like that between them. Now, Dana's shift at the hair salon was usually a 9-to-5 sort of shift. She was always trying to be out early. She wasn't one to be sitting around waiting for, you know, people to come or leave or close up. She was trying to close up shop. So basically, you know, because it cost money to keep those lights on and running, you know what I mean, and that the electricity going. So if they weren't getting a haircut, she wasn't trying to sit around and have no discussion. You know how you had those people come over, you know, into the salon, or they come over into the business and they just hanging out there. They just don't leave. They're like hanging out, talking to you, and they're just not leaving. It's like, okay, bitch, we about to be talking in the dark in a minute. Like, if it was me, I'm the type where I'll be turning off lights. Yeah, keep talking, especially if like you're running a business like that in a small shop. You can't just be sitting around wasting money on lights just to be having conversations with people. It's like, we can take this outside and have a conversation there, and we can return back. But we can't sit inside of here, okay? All right, now with the lights on. July 31st, 1995, Dana was having her normal day at work. She actually purchased some cleaning supplies from a local door-to-door saleswoman named Diane Harris. If you've ever been to a salon to get your hair done or to get your nails done, then you know there are always those people who just like show up out of nowhere and they're like trying to sell your nail tech products, or they're trying to sell like fake Gucci bags and glasses. I don't know if that happens to you guys, but that definitely always happened to me when I used to go get my nails done. So Diane sold Dana some cleaning supplies for the salon before taking off to, you know, the other shops in the area and just going around, you know, making her rounds trying to sell her products. But basically she showed up later on that day and she waited outside for her ride to come and pick her up. And while she was waiting, she says that she heard a loud noise coming from the salon, and then she saw like the lights go out and she heard like some noises that didn't sound right. So she was like, okay, this is freaking weird. And then she saw a guy, some random guy, climbing out of the salon window. When she initially heard the noises, she was thinking maybe Dana is still inside cleaning up or doing something. Although Dana did try to get out of the salon pretty early most days, there were times where she would stay late. So it wasn't super unusual, but it was unusual because of the sounds that were going on in there. That was like, what the hell is happening? And I believe it was around 8:30 that all of this was happening. Alarmed, Diane decides to run to a nearby store, shop, or someplace where she could get help, because remember, it's 1995, so back then they don't have cell phones like us. They can't just text 911 or call. And in fact, my phone, if you swipe it up or down or something like that, if you don't respond within so many seconds, it'll just automatically dial 911. They didn't have this type of technology back then. I do think they may have had cell phones. They definitely had beepers. They may have had the chunky cell phones, but a lot of people weren't able to afford that type of stuff. On her way to go get help, she actually ran into the guy that she saw climbing out of the window. Why this fool didn't think to put a mask on or disguise himself, I don't know. Why he just think he could climb in and out of people's windows and just walk down the street like nothing ever happened. I have no idea, but it seems that that's what this guy thought. And so she was absolutely terrified, and she was able to find someone at a local gas station or convenience store, and she was able to call 911. She was able to get the police down there. Now, when the police showed up to the scene, they thought that they were responding to their typical 911 call. Typical 911 call? What 911 calls are typical, Zahara? They thought that they were showing up to their typical burglary call, is what I meant. But the officers walked around the trailer, you know, to see if there was anything going on. They didn't hear or see anything, so they then entered the trailer. Now, as the officer is walking through the salon, he's not really seeing too much of anything. I mean, it's dark inside, and he has his flashlight, and he's walking through. And everything seems to be in place until he gets to the back room. And that is when he discovers Dana Satterfield's lifeless body hanging from a water tank. There was also some blood nearby on the floor. Although they tried to resuscitate Dana, they were too late. They were unable to bring her back to life, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators did not find anything out of place in the salon. They did not find any missing cash. Dana's purse and wallet was still there. Her car was still there and hadn't been tampered with or broken into. So none of the valuables in the salon had been missing or tampered with or taken at all. They were all still in place. And they did find evidence that there may have been some sort of sexual assault on Dana, so they were planning to do a rape kit. When they found Dana's body, it was hanging from the water tank, like I said. Her attacker had used a red strap to hang her from this water tank, and everything at the scene pointed to this being staged. At least that's what the police thought, just off of the initial look at the scene. Police were already thinking from the jump that this is not any sort of burglary, that something else happened here. They were already leaning towards it being a sexually motivated crime. Forensics fingerprint examiner was called out to the scene of the crime to take prints off of this water cooler and other things inside of the salon. While they were dusting for prints, they did find a huge print on that water tank that her body was near, that her body was hanging from. So they thought, okay, this has got to be the killer, because the fingerprint examiner, when he dusted and caught the print, he did mention to the detectives that whose ever print that was, that it probably was the killer. Like, he was sure, like 100% sure it was most likely the killer, because there was no way that the killer would have been able to hang her from the water tank without leaving his prints in that spot. And even the investigators were thinking to themselves, 100% sure? Like, we don't know, maybe. But it was just a very bold statement to make at that time, because, you know, they're trying to find this killer, and if the fingerprint examiner is telling them that in the place that the fingerprint was left, that it had to have definitely been the killer, I mean, even as an investigator, I would probably believe this guy and think the same thing, like, oh, okay, like, probably he knows what he's talking about, you know? Dana Satterfield's body was taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy report. They also ran a rape kit on her, which turned back to be positive. So she had been sexually assaulted, and they were able to take the DNA from that rape kit and make up a DNA profile. Once they got the DNA profile, then they started to look for their killer. Now, Diana Harris, the woman who called the police in the first place and initially witnessed this guy climbing out of the salon window, she was able to help police draw up a sketch of the assailant, because she had seen him. She had seen him climb out of the window once, and it was dark outside, but then she had ran into him later and saw him again. Also, another witness came forward and said that he was driving around that area that night, around that time, around 8:30ish, and there was another business nearby the salon that was closed that had this blue and white Ford Bronco sitting outside of it. And he thought that it was kind of strange because, well, the business was closed, sir, so it's time for whoever there need to go home. The forensic fingerprint examiner ran the prints that they picked up off the water heater, and they got a hit. It was none other than Dana's estranged husband, Mike Satterfield. Now, remember, you guys, Mike and Dana, they were separated. They were not divorced yet, but they had a very amicable separation. They were not angry with each other. Now, the kids did stay with Mike most of the time in their home, and Dana stayed most of the time in the city near her salon. But Dana would oftentimes come back and spend a lot of time with her kids and the father of her children, Mike. And this was just their relationship. Like I said, they only lived about a half a mile away from each other, so it wasn't that far. I guess this was the best way for her to keep her business and to also be with the children. Since the forensic fingerprint examiner had brought to the police's attention and made them aware that whoever had left that print was definitely the killer, the police kind of had this idea going in the back of their minds, like, yeah, whoever left that print, you know, is probably the killer. So they were all about Mike. They were thinking he has to have had something to do with it. But with further investigation, they found out that Mike, he had installed that water tank, so that is the reason why his prints are on it. And he told police, like, when they initially asked him, hey, the reason why my prints are on that water tank is because I actually installed it. He was actually the one to do most of the repairs on Dana's salon. So of course that was a good explanation for why his prints would be at the scene of the crime, especially on that water heater. Also, Mike Satterfield, and I mean no disrespect, he was more of a heavy-set guy. Police believe there was no way that Mike could have climbed in and out of that window. The window was super small, and it was on, like I said, sort of a trailer because it was a mobile home. They had no additional evidence that Mike had anything to do with Dana's death. And in fact, he seemed very, very supportive of her. Even in their separation, they seemed to somehow work things out and be very supportive of each other. And you could just tell, even in the interviews and when he was talking, how much he really loved Dana. He also had an alibi for the night that Dana was murdered, and it was confirmed by his daughter. And there was one other thing that kind of took Mike off of their suspect list. The witness's description of the person she saw climbing out of that window did not match Mike at all. She said it was a white male about 5'9", and he was wearing blue jeans and a gray t-shirt, and he was rather slim, and he looked pretty young. So he was cleared as a suspect, and police had to let him go. There was no additional evidence or information pointing to him being the killer whatsoever. In fact, it pointed away from that. I feel like the fingerprint examiner kind of jumped to conclusions without the actual proof, and probably shouldn't have said that to the investigators, because, you know, it obviously planted some little seeds in their head that made them spend a lot of time on Mike that they probably could have been on somebody else. But thank God they didn't spend too much time, and that they were able to come to the conclusion that Mike was not the killer, and they took him off their suspect list. So based on the description that Diane Harris gave them, the police were able to come up with a composite of who they believe the killer was, and they distributed his images to the media in the area so that they can kind of get it out there too, with warnings saying like, wanted, if you've seen this guy, call us because we're ready to pick his ass up. Investigators went back to the scene of the crime, and they dusted the entire trailer for prints, and they did find a few other prints in that trailer. They did focus on the area where Dana's body was found, that water heater. They just believe that the killer's prints had to somehow been in that area because of the way he strapped Dana onto the water heater. They was really trying to get something off this water heater, boy. Now, while searching the crime scene, they found one fingerprint in particular that was in Dana's blood. And they took this print and all the other prints they found at the scene, and they submitted it to the statewide fingerprint database. The statewide fingerprint database, it holds all the fingerprints of all the prisoners had been arrested and in prison in South Carolina. Now they were convinced that whoever fingerprint was in that blood was the killer. They looked through hundreds of prisoners, but with no luck. They were unable to get a match. So then they started looking for this blue and white Ford Bronco that was seen that night. The police checked out every single lead they got on the Ford Bronco, but it turned up nothing. It was just another blue and white Ford Bronco. And I guess this car, even though it's kind of I wouldn't say rare, but it's kind of not that popular to see. It seemed to be popular in that area because there was a ton of them that police had looked at that were not the Ford Bronco that they were looking for. It was really sad because every time Dana's children or her husband Mike saw some Ford Bronco go by, they called it in because they just was hoping that it would be a lead to who Dana's killer actually was, that she would get some justice someday. Now, although police were doing the best that they could to find Dana's killer, a year would go by with no new leads and no luck, and eventually the case went cold. But then investigators got a break in the case when a prison inmate told police that he had some information about Dana's case, that one of his cellmates, 29-year-old Russell Trevor Quinn, had spoke about Dana to him often, so as though he knew something about the case. And in prison, I don't know if you guys know, I've never been in prison. Hopefully y'all never been in prison either. But from the shows that I watch, I know and probably you guys know too, that a lot of times there are informants in prison. They will collect this information from other inmates and offer it to police so that they are able to get a lesser sentencing in their own case. So that's basically how it works. So don't be telling everybody your business. But anyway, you shouldn't be in prison. So if you're in prison and you're telling people your business and you get caught, oh well, sir. This Quinn guy would talk about Dana. He would talk about how attractive he thought Dana was, and actually he was in prison on a similar charge to what had happened to Dana. He had been incarcerated for raping a woman and tying her up to a tree, which kind of fit the description of what happened to Dana. So investigators were thinking this might be our guy. Also, he was out on bail at the same time that this whole thing happened to Dana. So they definitely, it's starting to like add up and look like this Quinn guy possibly was the killer. He also fit the eyewitness's description for who the killer was, who she saw coming out of that window. It appeared as though police had found the guy. But as we know, in any investigation, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now, just because Russell Trevor Quinn matched the description of the eyewitness doesn't mean he actually did it. The next thing police did was to bring Diane Harris, the eyewitness, down to see if she could point Russell Trevor Quinn out in a photo lineup. So they got a bunch of photos of different guys that fit the description and build of the assailant that she claimed she saw, and they put them all in a lineup. She was able to identify Russell Trevor Quinn as the guy she saw that night sneaking out of the salon window and running down the street. Police finally had something to go on here. They had a solid ID of the person who had been in the salon that night with Dana. With further investigation, other witnesses came forward saying that they knew this guy and that they had seen him around the salon before, and that they had seen him driving a similar car to the blue and white Ford Bronco. It wasn't an exact same car, but it was like a similar car, and they said that he had spoke about Dana before, and everyone started coming forward saying, you know, it appeared as though he was the one. However, when police ran a test on Quinn's DNA, his DNA did not match the biological DNA that they found at the crime scene from that rape kit. What the hell? Who the hell is it? So police were back at square one. This was another dead end, and as you can imagine, they are growing increasingly impatient and just, they want to find this guy. Oh my God, is it me, or does my eyebrows, one eyebrow look up and one eyebrow looks down? Like, what is happening to my brows today? What is happening? I don't know. Guys, I'm so weak and tired from being sick that I don't even have jokes for you guys today. I'm so sorry. Police were so disappointed and frustrated because Russell Trevor Quinn matched their description. He was picked out of the lineup. Everything about Russell Trevor Quinn, he knew Dana. He talked about her before. He drove a similar car. He was in that area. He was out on bail at the time of her murder. Everything pointed towards this guy. He just wasn't the guy. Police were just so incredibly disappointed. They really wanted to catch this guy, and you know, what can you do at that point? If he didn't do it, he did do it. Although he did other things, so I would still lock his ass back up and put him in prison and then go about my business looking for the next killer. But I know that's against the law, but Zahara's law would have did that. Okay, she would have. Investigators were back to square one. They had nothing. They had no new leads, and so the case went cold for 10 years. I'm about to slap the police. Okay, I'm about to slap the police. Why did the case go cold for a decade? Can somebody explain to me? Please explain to me. I'm hoping that it did that because they didn't have enough, I don't know, technology back then to solve a case like this, and maybe that's why it went cold. But actually, it would take Dana's daughter, Ashley Satterfield, to come forward and help solve the case. Now it's time to go into the palette. But anyway, back to the story. So at this point, Ashley had grown up. She was in college. One day, Ashley takes her car into a local shop to get it fixed. It was like an oil changing station, they called it, I believe. This was actually the second or third time that Ashley had gone into the station to get repairs. Now, there was a mechanic working at this auto repair place. He had noticed Dana's car because it had been the second time Dana had brought a car in for repairs. And he told the guy that was servicing Dana, like, hey, she bringing this car in again? This is like the second time she brought this car in within a week, you know? And he was like, yeah. Then he tells the mechanic, who wants to remain anonymous, so he's just going to be called the mechanic. The guy tells the mechanic, hey, did you know that that is Dana Satterfield's daughter, the woman who got murdered in Roebuck? And he's like, Dana Satterfield's daughter? I didn't know she had a daughter. And he's like, yeah, she does. And that's her, Ashley. Just so happened that this guy knew something about Dana's murder, and he had come forward a long time ago when investigators initially started their investigation. When the mechanic learned that Ashley was Dana's daughter, he felt really guilty and convicted to come forward because he knew something about Dana's murder. In fact, at the time of her murder, he was just 17 years old, and he had a friend named Jonathan Vick, who was also 17 as well. And he claims that on the night of the murder, he and Vick were driving around and he mentioned Dana to him. He said that he had known that Jonathan liked Dana for a while because he would always, he would always talk about her, about how beautiful she was, how hot and sexy she was, and how he wanted to do something with her. In fact, he says that that night in the car, the conversation got pretty sexual. After going into some very explicit details about what he wanted to do to Dana, he was saying that he had a date with Dana and that he was going to get a date with Dana, but his friend kind of thought, like, you're out of your mind. This woman is married. Well, she wasn't married, but she was married, but she was separated. But he was thinking, this is a 27-year-old married woman. Why would she go on a date with your ass? Is what he was thinking. He didn't say that, but that's what he was thinking. He just thought that Jonathan was just crushing on this woman or losing his shit over an older woman, but he wasn't thinking anything else of it. Now, according to the mechanic, the night that he was driving around with Jonathan that night, that they were driving in a blue and white Ford Bronco, just like the one found near the crime scene. He says that Jonathan told him that he was going to go get a haircut that night, and when he asked him, where are you going to go get a haircut at, he said, I'm going to go to Dana's place. And he was laughing. He was like, this late at night, you're going to go over to her place? He was like, yeah, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to get a date. What, you think I can't do it? And he says he just thought it was a joke, and he started laughing at him. And he noticed that when he started laughing, that Jonathan wasn't laughing and didn't think it was funny. And he was actually taking itself very, very seriously. So he claims that later on, when he saw the news about Dana Satterfield, because he said that he never knew her last name, so he wasn't even sure when he saw it on the news if it was her. But when he saw the news and that it was at the same salon that, everybody was going to get their hair cut at, where his friends got his hair cut at, he assumed that it might be his friend, but he didn't really want to think that it was his friend, but he knew that his friend had gone there, so he was kind of thinking, like, could it be him? Now, keep in mind, you guys, he was just 17 at the time, so probably he wasn't really thinking that his buddy had murdered this woman. He was probably thinking like somebody else did it. But, he did think that it was bizarre, and he did actually contact the police saying, you know, I'm not sure if it's my friend or not, but I have a friend at school and he actually drives this blue and white Ford Bronco, just like the one described on the news. And he did tell me he was gonna go see Dana on that night. But when he called anonymously because he was really afraid of Jonathan, because he says that later on, after the whole murder had happened, he was driving with Jonathan and Jonathan told him, like, he kind of inadvertently admitted to doing it and saying, like, if you say anything, I'm gonna hurt you, like I'm gonna kill you too. So this guy, actually, he was pretty scared that Jonathan was going to do something to him. So he called police anonymously, and police did follow up on his tip. They went to Jonathan Vick's home and they spoke with his mother. They asked her about the Ford Bronco and everything. Girl, I'm about to look like a watermelon. This was not the plan, but it's kind of going there, but it was not the plan. Police also went to the family's home and they searched the vehicle. They searched the Ford Bronco. And when they asked his mom said, no, you know, this is not the vehicle that you saw. They were getting pretty antsy about police and people bothering them as far as like the vehicle. Because, you know, people, when they would see the Ford Bronco sitting on the side of the road at their house, they would stop and ask questions because they knew that it had something to do with Dana's case. And so, you know, Jonathan Vick's mother and his family, they were just getting pretty tired of people stopping and bothering them about it. And so they put a sign on the vehicle that said, this is not the Ford Bronco that was blah, 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 you know, just so that people would leave them alone. Investigators even tried to get a court order to get Jonathan Vick's DNA so that they could pair it to the DNA that they found at the crime scene, but the court denied it. They denied it because they didn't believe that owning a vehicle that was similar to the one seen near the crime scene was sufficient grounds to get this court order to get his DNA or to say he had anything to do with the case. So because of all this, sadly, police had to drop their investigation into Jonathan Vick. So fast forward 10 years and this same mechanic guy runs into Dana's daughter, Ashley, and he didn't even know that she had kids. And he said that just the fact that she had children, he just felt this really strong conviction to come forward and talk to police again about the investigation. So again, he went back to police and he told police, hey, listen, I want to remain anonymous and I want to leave an anonymous tip, but I did call in before, about 10 years ago when her murder first started happening. I just want to see if you guys looked into this guy. He goes down to the police station. He says he wants to remain anonymous, but he does have this information about a friend that he believed was involved in Dana's murder 10 years earlier. I know. I do want to say hats off to this guy because he could have just been like, well, it's over. It's none of my business. I don't have to even look into it. I don't have to worry about it anymore. Like, it's already past the time and, you know, I don't want to get in trouble with anybody, but he didn't. Really quick, you guys, I just wanted to give you a little tip I have been using that I've been loving. I've been taking some makeup remover onto a Q-tip and just wiping the edges away, like the excess shadow away, to create that winged sharp look right there. Instead of using these little things, foundation or concealer, and touching that area back up. I don't know, just thought I could give tips to anybody about makeup, but that's what I've been doing and it's been working and I really like it. So anyway, back to the case. Although Jonathan Vick's friend, the mechanic, did come forward and talk to police, there was nothing they could really do because this guy wanted to remain anonymous, and unfortunately they could not get a court order to get Jonathan Vick's DNA without the friend slash mechanic guy coming forward and giving his name and giving this testimony and statement. So it was kind of a sticky situation. So at this point, police were like, okay, we still can't do anything. We're back at square one. And they were wondering why this guy did not want to come forward. Like, if there was something on his record, maybe he was involved or maybe he did something wrong. Like, why was he so adamant about remaining anonymous? I mean, I'm not a police officer and I could pretty much figure that one out. Okay, boys, like, come on. He didn't want to die. Like, what about that? I'm sorry, I almost knocked the whole table over. Ooh, I like it like that. She working at Vick. I don't know. Slow motion for me, baby. That's more than I thought that was going to be. I can't even tell you guys the story right now, okay? I am putting on this shadow. I will get back to you after these messages because, oh my God, that is so pretty. Wow. Investigators believe that after dropping his friend off at home, Jonathan Vick headed over to Dana's salon. Once he got there, they believe she was probably cleaning up and, you know, getting ready to leave, and he kind of snuck up on her and, you know, requested a haircut. They believe at some point during their interactions, he tried to come on to her, like he tried to make advances towards her, and she denied him. She said no. They believe she probably laughed him off because he was 17 and she was 27. She was 10 years older than him. So she probably blew him off, and that is when he locked the door to the salon and turned off the lights and proceeded to attack Dana. He drug her into that back room where he attacked her and then strangled her to death. After that, they believe that he then tied the red strap around Dana's neck and hung her from the water heater to make it look like it was some sort of accident or suicide attempt, which obviously the forensic evidence at the crime scene proved differently. What police really did not get was why he decided to leave from the window instead of the front door, because that is eventually what got him caught. That's how the witness was able to see him. Perhaps he thought if he left through the front door, he'd leave his fingerprints on the knob. I don't know, because it's kind of weird too, because they didn't find his fingerprints at all at the crime scene. I mean, they found other prints in the trailer, but they did not find his fingerprints ever. And it was funny too, because the composite sketch that the investigators came up with, or what do they call? Forensic, I think they're called forensic, I don't know what they're called, but they're like, I know there's forensic sculptures. I know that there's forensic sculptors. I'm not sure what you call the sketch artists. I think they're just called sketch artists. So it was funny because the sketch of Jonathan Vick looked identical to Jonathan's actual photo. Like, it was strange how accurate that sketch was. There was a little bit of a discrepancy though, if whether or not the assailant's hair was blonde or brunette. Because it was dark that night, the witness wasn't really able to tell, but it just so happened that his hair ended up being a brunette color, like a dark brown color, and not a blonde. Now, according to the forensic investigators, they say that the reason why his prints were not found at the crime scene has a really good explanation. They said just because somebody was at the crime scene doesn't mean, and they touch things, doesn't mean that they will actually leave a clear print. It has a lot to do with the surface that they touched, whether or not it was textured or what type of surface it was, if it was a clean, flat, sleek surface where you could pull a print from, how much oil was on their fingerprints. Investigators did ask that anonymous witness that was Jonathan Vick's friend, the mechanic guy, why he hadn't come forward sooner. He did eventually come forward and give his name. His name is Michael Pace. Because Michael Pace did come forward and give his name, police were finally able to get that court order to get Jonathan Vick's DNA. So police went over to Jonathan Vick's place and they picked his ass up. At the time of his arrest, Jonathan Vick was still living in South Carolina. He was married and he had a daughter. He had just finished 2 years as a Marines in the military. So, I mean, I'm not so sure I want him protecting my ass, but Okay. With further investigation, police found that Jonathan Vick had been in quite a bit of trouble over the years. He couldn't really keep a job. He had been fired 15 different times for getting into altercations with supervisors and other co-workers. He just seemed like he wasn't able to get along with really anyone. He had 2 domestic violence charges on his record. One of the charges were dropped. He also had a vandalism charge, which was also dismissed. So he had been getting into trouble over the years and had just been getting stuff dismissed, but it didn't stop him from just continuing to be a troublemaker. When police confronted Jonathan Vick, he told them that he had nothing to do with Dana Satterfield's murder, that he didn't even know Dana, so he doesn't know where they're getting their information from. However, Jonathan Vick's DNA did match the biological evidence found at the crime scene. The forensic analyst compared Jonathan Vick's DNA to the DNA found in the rape kit at the crime scene. He couldn't even deny it. It was a 900 million to 1 match. He was the killer. Now that Jonathan Vick was put behind bars, investigators began to think he might be linked to another possible missing persons case. There was another acquaintance of his, Heather, who has been missing over several years. Heather Sellers was an acquaintance of Jonathan Vick. She had actually been engaged to Jonathan Vick just a couple of weeks before she disappeared. If that's not alarming, I don't know. Like, why do we keep letting people out that keep doing this stuff? Like, I just really want to know. I want to ask the criminal justice system, why? Why? Years later, they found Heather Sellers' car at the bottom of a river, and her case has never been solved. They believe that although Dana Satterfield was his first victim, she may not have been his last. Thanks to forensic science and some good police work, Jonathan Vick was convicted of Dana Satterfield's murder and sentenced to life in prison. And you guys want to know the disgusting, pitiful thing? He actually gave a statement when he was convicted in court, and he was just wailing like a fucking idiot pig, saying that he was wrongfully convicted, that Dana's murderer was still out there, and now he was rotting in prison for no reason, and they got the wrong guy, basically. Everything was about him. It wasn't, I'm sorry that this happened to her. No, everything was about him. He actually had the nerve to tell the judge and the jury that Dana did not get justice today. And the judge was just looking at him like, and then he said to him, "You're going to prison for the rest of your life, sir." Done deal. What do you guys think about this case and my makeup look? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like videos like these, you can check out my last episode. I'll leave a link on the screen right here or right here. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Please share because it really helps me out. And I'll see you guys next week with another Forensic Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. I'm gonna try to get it on Friday though. Gonna try to do good. Episode. Bye.